I'm Ray McIntyre. I am the K-12 consultant at the Department of Education. I have been in education. When I think about it, I just like fall down. This is my 36th year in education. I'm like, I can't believe it's been that long. I've spent my entire life in the science realm, even from like 6 years old, because science has always been my love. I am a high school teacher. I taught 9th graders for 20 years. God bless their souls. And primarily, I haven't said that in a long time, primarily biology and earth science. So that's what I have done. That's where my experience has been. Because I am the only one at KDE currently, I'm beginning to learn more about elementary, and middle is kind of like 9th graders, so I feel okay with them. But elementary, I'm still learning. So if you have questions about that, or if we want to talk, we can have those discussions. What we're going to look at today, one of the things when it comes to standards itself, people always want to know what are the standards, what do they look like, all of that. Okay, but as a teacher, whenever I'm talking with people, the first thing they ask about is assessment. So I'm all about instruction. That's where my heart is. That's where my passion is. But knowing that this is where people's thinking is, I've been working with some partners across the country about thinking about how can tasks, assessment tasks, what can they, if we can identify quality, what does that tell us about what instructional practices should look like? So we're getting to my beliefs and my passion by meeting the needs of what people are interested in. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So this particular component is a part of a two-piece module that is available on three-dimensional assessments on KY standards. The first session, which is the one we're going to be looking at today, is looking at task evaluation. The second part is actually developing tasks, and that's a whole different, like, long, drawn-out process, so we're not going to look at that today. We're just going to look at session A. So I like to demonstrate these kind of group norms just in terms of collaboration. These are the main pieces, like presuming positive intentions, being open to new ideas, be open to productive struggle, listening to one another because people have ideas, they might have concerns. Let's listen to one another and see what they have to say. I do not have a designated like break in here, so if you need to leave, feel free to do so. You know, just the general, like we all have been doing for years. Okay, so now we're going to get started. So what we hope to do today is these two main things. Identify what's valued in a task, what do we find important in a task, and then I'm going to show you some tools that are available and how to use those tools to actually look at tasks that you may already have access to. So let's start out at the very beginning. I keep saying task. Why do I keep saying task? Well, when I look at the framework for K-12 science education, that is the basis of the development of our science standards. These are the things that a group of well-known international and national people who came together at the national academies, and they said, these are the things that we find are important in science. These are the key pieces. This is what science instruction should look like. And a part of that are these three dimensions. The DCIs, which are the disciplinary core ideas, typically known as the content. The SEPs, which are the science and engineering practices, which are the doing of science. And the cross-cutting concepts, or the CCCs. And that is the sense-making lens through which we are identifying problems or trying to understand phenomena. So let me ask you this question. I'm going to be using the word phenomenon a lot here. what is a phenomenon?
Ray, something I want to invite to you guys that are virtual, you're the same as in person. So if you have any kind of question like that or that's posed, please answer.
It's the particular concept that is an attention getter. It's a hook. It's focused around whatever skill or whatever the topic is. For example, the aurora borealis. You know, that's your hook.
Okay.
That's a phenomenon that you would use.
Okay.
It's a real life scenario
Yeah.
that can be explained through scientific reasons.
Okay. Phenomena are those things that are observable that we can explain using science. Now, I would argue that it's not just a hook, that it's not just something we're going to set the stage like a topic, but that is something that we're actually going to explore. So, aurora borealis, it's just not, oh, here's the aurora borealis, now let's look at some data, and it has nothing to do with the aurora borealis. It is actually, what is happening? Why is that occurring? Why is it only in certain places around the world that it can be visible, or only certain times of the year? So that's when it becomes a phenomenon. Okay, so these dimensions, those three dimensions, interact with one another so that we can actually explain phenomena, or these can interact in order to solve some kind of a problem, whatever that problem might be. So, we're trying to move away from what students know, which is, for those of us who are old enough to remember Core Content 4.1, you know, that's what students know. We're moving away from that. It's really about using scientific principles, skills, and behaviors to make sense of the world. Students doing science, asking the questions, determining how do I go about figuring it out, whatever it is. That's what we want students to do. So what you might hear me say at times is that these dimensions of practices and cross-cutting concepts are used in service of understanding the core ideas, so that I get a deeper understanding of what's happening, a deeper understanding of the world around me, and I'm going to do the science utilizing these other dimensions. So that's how they interact with one another. So let me go back to my question, why tasks? So tasks elicit that sense making, that thing that we want students to do, that thing we want students to demonstrate, by focusing on the reasoning through the use of the practices, evidence, models, principles, and so forth. That's why we say tasks. So you won't hear me say assessment. But many people will use tasks as an assessment. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to first look and clarify our thinking about some three-dimensional. You'll hear me say 3D, three-dimensional. I'm talking about those three dimensions, practices, cross-cutting concepts, and core ideas. And we're going to look at some perspectives. Now, this is where I'm going to try something different. We're going to see how this actually works. I'm going to give you a perspective, like an A and a B. Perspective 1, perspective 2. There's no right answer in these perspectives. That's important to note. There's no right answer. And this is going to make some people frustrated. I recognize it will make some people frustrated because they want black and white. This is about your perspective, or your table's perspective, your group's perspective, as we talk about from a virtual world. But we want you to think deeply about your beliefs and about science education. So here's a scenario. Two teachers are discussing new science assessments, and they've run into some issues balancing different considerations for their tasks. They disagree about the right trade-offs. and to support all their students, although overall they have the same kind of vision for science education. So there's going to be some trade-offs that are going on here. So when I present these perspectives, I'd like you to think about it for yourself. I'd like you to choose a perspective, and since you have the PowerPoint, you can circle which one. I'd just like you to do something to commit yourself, because what happens sometimes is people will change their mind because they want to be with their buddies, kind of thing. Just circle or what have you. And then we're going to share these. And the way I'd like to share these is once you have committed, I'd like you to come up to the appropriate, so you're going to get to move around, up to the appropriate chart, and I'll point which one it is. And I'd just like you to use either a Post-it or a marker or a pen or something, and just mark which perspective you agree with. For our virtual friends, what I would like for you to do is get your advocates involved and let them know what you think, and then our advocates can come up here and share on the chart as well. First perspective is around phenomena. Perspective 1. I think phenomena are useful for students, but they're not necessary in an assessment. They're nice to have, but they're not required. Perspective 2 says phenomena and problems are essential in a three-dimensional assessment in the tasks. So the poster is this one here that's marked phenomena. So I'll give you some time to think, commit, talk with your group, and then come up here and mark which perspective you agree with. What I'm seeing now is that everybody in this room seems to have come to a consensus that phenomena are essential. So in other words, it's not going to be something that a task is going to be just like a topic, but that you're actually going to be doing something in that task, that you're going to be actually exploring that phenomenon within that task, is what I'm getting out of this. All right. Okay, let's look at another perspective. This one, I care most about whether students learned what they are supposed to as described by the standards, being very grade specific, or I care most about whether students can flexibly make sense of different kinds of phenomena or problems using those three dimensions as needed. And that is here on this poster, standards versus flexibility. Oh, you got a middle. Oh, good. I mean, I think that's great. We might have them actually speak with us in just a moment. So I'll just say that I am very surprised by this. I'll be honest. Because I generally get a greater spread here. So, because a lot of people say that if we're going to make any kind of test and tasks and assessment, that we have to be grade specific. We have to do exactly what the standards say and so forth. However, everyone, although I have to read what Pike says, we're going to talk to them in a minute because they're middle of the road, but everybody else says flexibility. So I would like to hear, or like some of you to share your thinking around this particular perspective about flexibility.
We talked about perspective 2 encompassing perspective 1, because initially I was kind of in the middle as well, but my group was like, well, if you're doing 2, then you've got the content and you are applying the content. So if you have the ability to apply the content, then that's a higher level.
Okay, so if I'm understanding, this group is kind of coming to a consensus around thinking about perspective 2 as an application. Is that what am I getting that correct?
Yeah, application beyond think application beyond your basic, here's my unit test and here's what you had to know. Can they leave my classroom and apply that in multiple situations beyond just my content and what I've taught in that class? I have a son going to like the University of Louisville. Okay, great, he did great in high school, but can he apply that beyond what I decided was important that day for that particular unit? That's what I
Okay.
was thinking.
Okay.
Thank you.
Other ideas about perspective 2. Pike County, we're going to call on you all because you are middle of the road. And we would like to hear why middle of the road, please.
Okay, we're here, Pike County. We just kind of talked about in the room with us, we have a K2, 3, 5, and then middle school and high school. And we just talked about from the grade 4 and 7 that we just feel like we're limited having to give the state assessment for our students to be successful. We can't be as flexible with perspective 2 is making sure they do get their grade level content and they have those, you know, DCIs and CCCs and everything down by what it says for their grade level.
So if I heard correctly, you're middle of the road but you're thinking that 4 and 7 and 11 would be more grade specific, but the other grades would be more flexible. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes, because they wouldn't have, you know, like have to get everything done by the end of that year. If they need to kind of move around or stay on something a little bit longer, they would have more flexibility.
Okay. Okay. Is there anyone else in our virtual friends who would like to tell us about your perspective 2? Number 3, we're going to do 4 of these. There's 6 in your PowerPoint. We're just going to do 4 of them to give you a flavor. And the 4 that I chose are the ones that drive generally more discussion. So I'm curious to see how the other 2 are going to go after this one that we just looked at. Okay, so number 3, perspective 1. If we focus on sense making, the 3 dimensions will naturally emerge in student performance and responses. Whereas perspective 2 says those assessments need to be designed to specifically elicit each dimension, that is those elements that we want to measure, we want to surface. Those are the 2 perspectives. And that is over here, natural versus specific. In the middle, another middle. Woohoo, okay. This one was a little bit greater variety that was going on. So let me stand over here. So we still have a fair number that's on perspective 1, which is talking about natural emergence. Come on in. We want all the data we can get.
So I had 2 more ones.
2 more ones. All right. Yeah. So we have a fair number. The majority are actually looking at naturally emerging, so that as long as we're doing some kind of sense making, that students are actually going to be demonstrating their understanding of the 3 dimensions. That's what that's saying. And we had a few, though, that says, nope, they need to be targeted. And then we had even more in the middle. There's 2 plus 1 more that didn't get up here. So we've got 3 that are kind of in the middle. So let's have a little discussion about this. So I'm going to start with perspective 2, the ones that says that they need to be targeted. So whoever said, and these aren't labeled, so whoever said that they should be targeted, share with us your thinking about that.
I guess, Ray, it's important to say there's no wrong or right answer with
That's
this.
right. There's no wrong or right answer. We're just trying to understand perspectives. And so if you say that it should be specific, like can you just share your thinking about that perspective?
All right. I don't want to blast their ears. I'm a loudspeaker. Okay, so basically, we said that there was this kind of thing between naturally emerging in the responses versus having to elicit everything. And we kind of based it on our own experiences, and that even when we do these sense-making activities and focus on those lessons and then we assess them, we're not always seeing this natural emergence. If we want to see something, it's like we always have to design something specifically in order to, I don't know what I'm trying to say.
It's just very fragmented otherwise.
Yeah.
Okay, so based on your experience, students aren't not demonstrating natural emergence, and therefore a perspective 2 being targeted makes more sense. Okay. So since the majority said naturally emerging, how would you react to their thinking? Boy, you all are a talkative group.
They don't want to pick a fight, right?
Y'all, there is no right answer here.
You need one of those donuts, it'll get y'all fired up.
Were there any comments shared? You want to go ahead and go?
Okay.
Okay, so we said that, we utilize Amplify science in our middle grades. And we feel like when they have a phenomena that they follow through and they follow this storyline and it makes sense to them all the way through to the assessment, we feel like they get more out of, the assessment, they get more out of their answers than they do if we just specifically design something that, maybe doesn't completely go together. I mean, yes, the concepts go together, but, they're not following that storyline all the way through.
So what I think I heard, because you talked about a storyline and taking it all the way through to the assessment, are you describing more of an instructional sequence?
Right.
Ah, interesting. So I don't mean to put you on the spot, and if you don't have an answer, that's perfectly fine. It's just a question. Then are you seeing the task more from an instructional perspective instead of an assessment perspective?
Yeah, I feel like, yeah.
Ah, that's an interesting idea. What do you all think about that? Thinking about tasks more from an instructional sequencing versus an assessment.
We were thinking.
Okay. I think he needs to stay up front.
We were thinking instructionally as well.
Oh, okay.
And what we found, Nicole and I teach biology together, and we've been using the Illinois storylines. And what we found with Africa, and are you familiar?
I think so.
Okay. So Africa is a storyline, and it encompasses a lot of different content in the long storyline. But anyway, so one of the tasks is to determine relatedness based on DNA, but it's an inquiry style lesson. And so they don't really, they go into it not knowing a lot about DNA. So they will walk away knowing, well, there's more numbers in common, but so they're related more. But if you don't intentionally sprinkle in some topics about DNA and genetics and heredity, then there's no connection. Like, they can arrive at the right answer. They understand some of the basic, but they're not understanding the science behind it. And so you have to make sure that you are intentionally putting that in so they get the science.
Ah, okay, 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 okay. Okay. So we've picked up kind of a different perspective here, even thinking about, I think, maybe I'm wrong, this is an assumption, we all know what assumptions will get us, but thinking about tasks through an instructional sequence versus like an assessment kind of, and that's a different perspective that I've never heard brought up during this discussion. So thank you for that. Yeah, that was really great. So that leads then to the middle of the roads. So we've got Leslie and Jackson Independent that are middle of the road. Leslie.
That's the way you do it.
Oh, okay, y'all go first.
We were middle of the road because our perspective is a little different because we're K through 12 in one building. And I've been doing science in that building for 27 years, so I kind of see every grade level in my mind when I see something. Okay. So to me, in a perfect world, they're both right. And at the lower level, especially, if you focus on the sense making, of course, and just things happening kind of naturally emerging, but then we all know when you get to the little bit higher levels, you have to be a little specific in what you're doing, because there are things, but hopefully they still have that sense-making idea in their mind, and then they can just kind of, you're more intentional in your application of that. And then, of course, we all know when you get to the 11th grade, it's still pretty intentional on the KAS, but then, you know, you also have to take the ACT, which is more of the almost reading and sense-making. So it's just, to me, in a perfect world, they are merged.
Okay. Okay. Leslie?
Okay. Let's see. We're in the middle, although I don't know how much we is. I think I'm persuading them. In an ideal world, everybody's going to be on the exact same level, at the exact same point, at the exact same maturity level. So you're going to end up with that end target to where you give an assessment and everybody's going to do well. But that's not real world. I teach grades 4 through 8, and the variety of students that I have in my classroom, some of them will get it naturally. Some of them won't. I have to do a lot of pulling to get them to where I need them to be. So that's why I'm in the middle, because for some classes, on some years, it's perfect. In other times, it's pulling teeth. It just, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And it's the classes that you have on any given day at any given moment.
So in the middle, if I am understanding, you're in the middle and you've persuaded your table mates in the middle based on class dynamics. Okay, okay. Anyone from our virtual friends who would like to share out their thinking? They don't want to talk either. Okay. All right, we have one more perspective, and that is this one. Okay, this one might be, well, I'm not going to say nothing. Perspective 1, it's important that every task requires students to use the core ideas. Or perspective 2, it's important that all tasks happen in a disciplinary context, but it's okay if it only requires the students to use the practices and cross-cutting concepts. In this case, it's very similar in terms of distribution as we had with the previous perspectives, where the majority are perspective 2, which is more about it can happen in a context, that there is a context, but it's okay if students are only required to use the practices and cross-cutting concepts, right? Come on in, more data. There you go, you get all your steps. We had a couple that said that every task, the students have to use the core ideas. And then we had some that were in the middle. So I'm going to start with the perspective 2, which is where the majority is. And I'll call on Floyd, since they have something to share.
Yep. And this is from Principal Christina Crace, Floyd County School of Innovation, and Stacy Shannon, the Renaissance Academy, Floyd County, and Melissa Turner, Principal Prestonsburg High. So I want to give them a shout out. And they came to consensus on perspective 2. Sometimes lessons take more practice to get students ready to apply core ideas later.
Oh, okay.
Sometimes lessons take more practice to get students ready to apply core ideas later.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a question and they can let you know if I am getting this right. So again, they're looking at this, I think looking at this from an instructional perspective, and that it's important that these are these are more important because students, if students do this, then they'll get the core ideas. Did I hear that right? Okay.
In Floyd County,
We're in a little group chat.
in
Gotcha.
Floyd County, you can unmute also, either way.
I'll unmute. This is Miss Crace. That's exactly what I was meaning when I said that. And I have a math background. So for me, it's, thinking mathematically, I can't teach this big, huge equation if kids don't know a couple things leading up to that. So I always think it takes practice on certain tasks and certain skills before they can ever apply the big core ideas.
Okay. Thank you for that. Anyone else from perspective 2 who feels that the context is important, but it's more important that, that it only requires the other 2 dimensions? Oh.
I'm going to read something from one of our McGoffin County science teachers.
Okay.
Miss Vicki Howard from Earl Whitaker Middle School. She says sometimes the most effective learning comes from a series of mini tasks within the larger task, and students often can engage more gradually that way. So not all mini tasks need to be geared towards science core ideas so stringently. It gives students an opportunity to scaffold their thoughts, understandings, and products.
Okay, so looking at tasks almost from a scaffolding perspective, talking about the mini tasks and that will eventually get up to the bigger idea. Okay, all right, okay. What about perspective 1? I already said I was going to call on Pikeville, or Pike. Is it Pike? Pikeville. Pikeville, okay. Are they ready?
Pike, can you unmute? Is Pike there for us? Oh, Pikeville Independent. Kim, can you unmute?
Yes, I was
All
just
right.
sure that you were calling on me. I think perspective 1, and my thought process is the core ideas maybe being the conceptual framework, like that is there to guide the student thinking. And I thought this one was the hardest one actually, but I just think that core idea is kind of your broad and they just kind of overlap. And that's with me just getting into these standards in the last few months and looking at them. But that was my thought process, is that every task should include that. but I do see what some of the others have been discussing as well. And I thought this one was the hardest one of all of the thought experiments that we have completed.
Thank you. What about the middle of the road folk after hearing perspective 1 and 2? I've got Knott and Jenkins Independent. Another middle of the roader.
Well, we definitely agreed with what McGoffin and Floyd said, and that was really our mainly we were perspective 2, but we could not help but think about how in a perfect world, perspective 1 would be wonderful, but here in this post-pandemic mess that we're in, you know, on a day-to-day basis, it's pretty much number 2, and it's okay. I mean, I think number 2 is perfectly fine, but we also didn't want to lose the fact that it would be wonderful to be in perspective 1. We just, you know, on a day-to-day basis it's just, you know, the other things come into play a lot, so.
Okay. And then a Knott. We have a couple tables. I don't know which table it might have been. Who was middle of the road? I'm looking at this table here because of the way they're looking at each other. It's like that. They're all looking like, oh no.
I don't know what school, I can't remember what school you guys were, but yeah, we kind of agreed with what you guys said. We said it's, we were really kind of stuck in the middle with this one. That's about it.
Okay, all right, that's fair. That's perfectly fair. Is there anyone else who'd like to share on this one? So I heard say that someone thought that this was the harder or the hardest of the 4 thought experiments. Do y'all agree with that? I'm just curious. Not sure? Okay. So in going through this process, there we go. We saw that there were different perspectives. Now, generally, I will share with you, especially if you do this with people in your district, that there's a range of different perspectives. And all the times I've done this, and I even did this at NSTA National as a 6-hour workshop, it was not so cut and dry. I've never seen it like this before. So, you know, it's making me wonder, are people trying to like get a right answer, or are people trying to think of best case scenario, or what it is? I don't know. Doesn't matter. These are perspectives, and that's the main thing. So you might see a wide range when you do this with people in your district. The perspectives are sometimes driven by different purposes also. So we talked about the idea that tasks being looked at more from an instructional sequence perspective as opposed to a straight assessment perspective. I heard someone, I think it was you, who mentioned about looking at it, I may be wrong, but somebody mentioned about connecting it to, at lower levels, it's great to have this flexibility, but upper levels like ACT and whatnot need to be more specific. A different type of purpose might drive our thinking on some of these. Also, some are grounded on personal philosophies. If you have a philosophy of saying, I just want kids to explore, then you might be more open to some who are more along the lines of, man, my superintendent is on me, I've got to get these kids ready for the test, and I've got to do this and this and this, and your perspective might be different because it's a different philosophy, a different realm in which you live. So we can balance these goals if we have a system of assessment, and we have to keep all of these differences in mind. When we're looking at tasks in and of themselves, just thinking about the purpose, our goals, what we're trying to get out of those tasks from students, what we want students to experience, all of those things, we need to keep all of those in mind. So I think I've already said this. If I haven't, I'll say it now. If I've already said it, I'm repeating. And that is, this is not black and white. That there are a lot of gray areas, and we need to be cognizant of that. So as we go through the rest of the day, you might see some gray areas. You may see a lot of gray areas, and that's okay. Recognizing those gray areas and recognizing because of purposes or perspectives that can drive the discussions and what we want for the students at a particular moment in time. So here's the key right here. What we value, what we really want to get from students, and for students to understand about their own learning is what's the most important thing. And that's why a big part of the gray area. So what we're going to be doing now, and this is where we'll be going into breakouts here in just a moment, is in your folders, either your virtual folders or in your, here you have in your paper folders, 3 tasks. And what I would like for you to do is a couple of things. I'd like you to work through the tasks as a student. And as you are working through the task, jot down what you like about the task. Jot down things that you're not really happy about or concerns about. And then I'd like you to order the tasks. In other words, which one do you think is the best of the 3, however you define best. And then the middle of the road and which one you think is not the best. Just for yourself at this moment. This is all individual work at this moment. And then make notes of whatever patterns you see when you are looking at these tasks, because we're going to be using this information for the next part. So before I go any further, do you have any questions?
What is the heading on?
Okay, so the 3 tasks are the ones that have these symbols: the moon, the sun, the thunderbolt. Sorry. There are 3 tasks that have the sun, the moon, the thunderbolt. Those are the 3 tasks that you will be looking at. Just those 3 right now. You'll be doing them as a student, making notes and comments about what you're observing, what you like, what you don't like, and patterning. And for yourself, just order them, which one you think is the best, middle, and not so great. I'm going to give you about 25 minutes, because this will take some time. If you have questions while you're working, please feel free to ask. Our virtual friends, we have about 25 minutes for you all to work individually at this time. Although some of you who are in the same room may end up talking to one another, that's perfectly fine. Okay, so 25 minutes. We wanted you to really analyze and look at these tasks and order them for yourselves, is to come to an agreement within your group as to which one you think is the best, the middle, and the not so best. And you're going to write an argument, all right? So that means then you're going to make your claim. You're going to tell me what your evidence is to support it, hence those notes that you were jotting down, and how and what your reasoning is, that is, what's your justification, all right? Not just like, how does that evidence support what you want? Now, this is how this is going to work. And if this does not work, I'm just trying this out, this may not work, okay? At your tables, at your tables, you will have chart paper to write your argument, and then you're going to put them up here on the walls. In the virtual world, in the participants folder, there's a Google slide deck. And what you will do is choose the slide for your district. And I know that some of them, the larger districts, have a 1 and a 2. I don't know that that's going to work. So if you just want to work together as one large group, that's perfectly fine. Then when we do then we'll do a gallery walk. So we'll give you about 15 minutes to write your argument. Now, let me say this all out one time. We'll do the gallery walk. The people virtually will do a virtual gallery walk with the slide decks. So you will be in one big breakout room, hopefully. All of you, all the virtual, you'll be in one big breakout room at the gallery walk to look at each other's slides. Here, we will do a traditional gallery walk with the posters. And then we will come back together and have a larger discussion. And that'll take us to dinner time.
Hey Ray, let's see.
All right, let's see if I don't know, we're going to see if this is going to work.
Because that's a great idea, and let me think about logistics. So if these guys go to breakout that are in virtual, they'll be grouped by their district like we've already had for this last one. And to be able to do that quickly, that's probably what we need to do. But on the gallery walk, they could just stay in those breakouts, and they have access to the participant folder that they could go get the Google Slides, or we bring them back to the main room. So if we brought them back to the main room, they're not going to be able to talk to each other as a district, and then they could go. So it's really your preference. Would you rather them be as a district when they do look at other people's, or would you rather them be in the main room?
If there is a way for there be like a breakout room just for virtual, to have the overall discussion gallery walk, that would be ideal if that can be logistically worked out.
Okay, so we'll talk with Jacob and see if we can work that out. In the meantime, they'll go to their district breakout.
Correct.
And they'll put their comments in these virtual slides.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, they'll write their argument in the virtual slide. Virtual folks, feel free to add slides if you need to. All right. So, the in-person folk, if you'll hang up your posters along the front wall here, just anywhere along this front wall, even if it's over the ones we've already looked at, the perspective posters, that's fine. So this is what we're going to do. The in-person, the people live, we're going to do a gallery walk of various people's ideas about what they have found. And then what we will be having is a short conversation about commonalities that we see that people were using for these various tasks to support their thinking. So we're looking for characteristics. In the virtual world, you're going to be looking at the Google Slides, doing a virtual gallery walk, and you should be having a similar conversation about what you see in terms of commonalities across the ordering that occurred with the 3 tasks. We're going to do this for about 10 minutes, having discussions. Then we're going to bring everybody back and have a larger discussion about findings. So my virtual friends, please make note. I've asked the advocates to think about and listen to the conversation so that they can share out also your general conversation, but that does not mean that you can't unmute later and also share that. Okay, so do you have any questions before we move forward?
So Ray, let me try to repeat what I think I understand.
Okay.
So for the virtual folks in person, that's going to be easy for them to do. For our virtual folks, you're in the large main room, and we're going to mute you here in the room so that if you can add comments, we do know that's a large group, but please feel free to share some of those comments. Our KVEC advocates still have their earbuds in, and so they're going to be able to hear you and pick up on any of the comments and things that maybe they can help share. But like Ray said, you can also just share out in the room as well when we bring you back from the main room during this gallery walk. Your gallery walk, of course, is virtual, and it's the slides that are in the participant folder. Is that right, Ray?
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay.
Okay, So about 10 minutes in our kind of separate rooms, basically. Okay. When you looked at the various arguments up here, what commonalities did you observe?
I don't even understand it because I'm kindergarten, you know? My mind is not there, so different perspectives.
Oh, okay. All right. So different perspectives would result in different ways of thinking about these various tasks. Okay. What I think I noticed, and I might be wrong, but I believe that people thought John Sand or the lightning bolt was not the best task. So what characteristic is telling you that?
You could use it as a teaching, to teach the scientific method, and the kids would do it, and you could go back and let them figure out what they had not thought about it. But as far as an assessment,
So purpose. So John's task is a lot about experimental design. And remember, one of the perspectives was, is it okay to focus on a practice, a cross-cutting concept, and not really have the core idea is just there, which was what we had, which a lot of people said they liked. But yet, you didn't like the task, which is kind of interesting. Huh, I never thought about that before. It just hit me. That's really interesting. Huh, does it make you want to change your perspective? Now, what I normally see is a flip-flop between swallows and rabbits. So some people said rabbits was the best, which is the sun. Some said rabbits is the moon. And some said swallows is the best, which is the sun. What's the difference?
Grade level.
Grade level.
Has a lot to do with that, maybe.
So do you think maybe it's because, again, perspective?
I think that's probably got a lot to do with it.
Hmm.
I know the reason that we picked sun for us, though, and we picked at the high school level, is that had the standard, did what it said it was going to do. It was, you know what I'm saying, and there was not a lot of, there wasn't anything that was confusing or, like in the other ones, we felt like there were things that were left off or that needed to be tweaked, and with this one, not so much either, so. But I think it was like we understood what grade level, or not even just like it has to be like 9th grade or 10th grade, but we understood like who is our audience.
Yeah,
with the rabbits, it's not so much, like we could use that in biology, but it would have to be like what level of response are we expecting back from that?
Okay. So, again, difference in perspective based on your personal experience as a high school teacher or kindergarten teacher.
I'm looking at this, and this is like a checklist. Okay, here's my materials, check. Here's my instructions. I do this first, I do this, I do this, then I do this, and it's broken down into how you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
As far as, yeah, give a K this, this will cry.
Okay.
So I guess my perspective and their perspective is what we teach differently.
Okay. Okay.
And I just want to say, like, I've been sitting here thinking I was crazy the whole time when we were doing the perspectives 1 and 2 all morning, and I'm thinking I could be on the fence on every one of them because you can see it all different ways. Perspectives are all different. It just depends on your children. They're different. They're going to see it different. You're going to teach them differently. Little Johnny doesn't learn like little Becky over here. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
The task has to be, different.
And I think that was mentioned this morning also about on one of these, when someone was in the middle and said that they like, they're in the middle because it depends on the students, that students might need it this way or that way. Is that our 10 minutes? Yeah. Okay. Okay, we're good? All right. Okay. So, virtual friends, feel free to unmute and share, or our advocates, whichever way you would like. What was some of the discussion that you were having about the criteria that people were using and how they were different?
So one of the discussions in our group was the conversation around the assessment and the alignment of the assessment. And so that was one of the ways they used that information to prioritize the order. And so there was some really good discussion about whether that matched or if that matched the intention of that task with the standard.
Oh, okay. So they looked at the alignment component as a criterion. Okay.
So my friends in Pike County said that the ordering was based on the application involved in the assessment. The Modeling Rabbits assessment has a detailed storyline in which they use sense-making skills to make a model at the end of the assessment. John's experiment involves a student analyzing an experiment and correcting mistakes within the experimental design. The evolution of Swallow's assessment is based on reading data and answering questions. There wasn't as much inquiry or critical thinking as it with others. So they're applying kind of the Bloom's taxonomy to the thinking here a little bit.
So using the amount of sense making as a lens for, okay. What do y'all, is there anybody else in the virtual world like to share? Right now, okay. So what do you all think about that? About using that lens of the amount of sense making that was occurring in the tasks themselves? What Pike County, they were talking about how they used the lens of sense making and the type and amount of sense making as a criterion for ordering. And so my question is, because that did not come up in our discussion, my question was, what do you think about that? And Pike, which one did you say was the better one?
They were thinking that the one where you had to create a model.
Okay. The rabbits. Okay. So they said rabbits had more sense making than the swallows. Okay, gotcha. What do y'all think about that? Oh, whoa, we have dissension.
Well, I'm just thinking about it. I was thinking of the end result. Like,
Okay.
my 8th graders did all 3 of these, let's say. And then they had to go on a panel and talk about science concepts with Bill Nye the Science Guy. They're really not going to know much about, they're not going to have much of a conversation at all about how to set up an experiment because they didn't really get a lot of that out of that activity. The rabbit one, they're going to know about ecosystems, and it just funneled you through the process a lot, you know. And they definitely could have some, they could have some conversations for sure about, what happened in the ecosystem and stuff. That's true. But I feel like the swallow one, that conversation is going to be good because those people know their stuff. They know what happened. They know what led up to it. They've analyzed the data. They've made some predictions. And if you even ask them, like, what could we do in the future in other ecosystems to help this kind of thing from happening, they're going to have some ideas. And that's my thinking of it. The end, what could they do at the end?
They also have to use a whole lot of cross-cutting concepts to get to the overall arching idea of natural selection. So it's all brought together in a nice little scaffolded bowl right at the very end.
Excellent. We heard that. Thank you.
About the overall goal of the classroom and to hit the edge, get the kids down the middle. We're going to get the kids down the middle, like you said, but does that design with the swallows, with the rabbits, do those visuals and do some of that representation, is it easier maybe for a student that's having difficulty with reading to glean some things from that? And so I'm always looking through that lens and thinking that might be more representative of an inclusive classroom as opposed to some that are pushing the bar the other direction.
And I'd like to comment on that also. That's one of the conversations that Wolf County had was about the scaffolds that were built in with that particular task.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a real good discussion about exactly what he's talking about, that inclusiveness and appropriate for all students.
So it goes back for our virtual friends. Before you joined us, we were talking about the role of perspective since we spent a lot of time with that this morning. and thinking about how for some people, like a kindergarten teacher may look at swallows and think, looking through her perspective, may look at swallows much more differently than a high school teacher would look at it, at that task. So perspective does have a role. The other thing, and I'm curious about what our virtual friends think about this, which I thought was very interesting, was how many people said that John Sand, the lightning bolt, was not the best task because it was more about experimental design. However, when we did the perspectives, that was the perspective that people chose. That is that content, it's okay to have, as a context, but it's okay just to write a task around practices or cross-cutting concepts. That one is clearly a practice. So your perspective was that's okay, but yet you're saying that wasn't the best task. So does anyone from our virtual world have any comments about that or thoughts?
We're going to call Floyd County out. Ms. Belcher says that they had a great response. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I'll talk about that. We just said that if that could actually be an experiment done by the kids to actually go through that process, it would make that much better, as opposed to just looking at that picture that says this is what happened. It would just get them more engaged, and they could actually think about it a whole lot more.
Thank you.
These tasks, a question was asked. Let me just say something about a question that was asked about. All of these tasks are Creative Commons, which means that you are free to use them. They are referenced where they came from. You're free to go to those sites and find other tasks. What I want to share with you all is when I have done this in the past, this hasn't come up in a while, but I remember the first time that I actually went through this process at KSTA actually, and we were going through this ordering, and we were asking for like what criteria you're using. A number of people, like a large number of people in that room, said that swallows was the worst and that John Sand was the best. And I asked them, like I did you all, what were your criteria? Like, why do you say that? And the reason that was given for swallows being the worst was my kids can't read it. I'm not getting that anymore, which is good to hear, but I'm just telling you that, sharing that with you, because you might come across something similar when you're working with the teachers in your districts. There is a lot of reading in swallows. I agree with that. But is it a rationale worthy of saying this is why it's the worst in terms of science? So I'm just sharing that with you all. So we've looked at some perspectives this morning. We have looked at some tasks. We have looked at criteria around the tasks. Somebody jumped the gun, which is the downside of giving you PowerPoints, because they put it in their criteria over there about a tool that can be used to actually look at tasks at through a large lens. And that's through a tool called the pre-screener. Now, in your packet and in your virtual packet, there is a copy of the pre-screen that looks like this. So you'll have the first page. It talks about the pre-screening tool, and then when you turn the page, then you'll have this image right here. I'll give you an opportunity to find it. So the front page, it'll be like purple and, blue and yellow. It'll be the NGSS colors. It'll say pre-screen tool, then you turn the page and you'll have this particular chart right here. This tool is available to look at a task at a very high level, like a quick, let me just go through this task and let me see if this is even worthy, quote unquote worthy, of using in the classroom. All right? You will notice that there are 8 criteria, big picture criteria. Many of them we've talked about already from our perspectives. So the first one up there, is there a phenomenon or a problem? That was one of the perspectives that we talked about. Is it majority can be answered with information without using, answered without using the information provided? Let's see. Number 3, can portions be answered using knowledge? Like, I don't even have to know anything. It's just, you know, it makes it look pretty kind of thing. Are they using reasoning, which I heard from over here about that whole idea of sense making? Looking at, and then this, do students have to use at least one SEP to successfully complete it? So kind of those bigger ideas that we talked about this morning. You'll notice that there are red flags listed on there. The red flags don't necessarily mean that it is bad. The red flag is simply saying, here's something you should be aware of. It goes back to purpose. I take John Sand just for a moment, and I took it through a pre-screen, I would probably get a lot of red flags. But if my goal with that task is to see if students understand experimental design, excuse me, it's doing what I want it to do, that task is fine. This is what I mean when I talk about a gray area. All right, so it's not cut and dry. You have to take those purposes into account when utilizing this tool. We're looking at it from a task perspective, and here's another important point right here. Right now, we're not really looking at grade level. We're just looking at like this, big picture. A question was asked about rabbits. What grade level is that? Excuse me. Excuse me. You know how it is like the first day of school when you haven't talked all summer long? I'm getting there now. Rabbits is, I think rabbits is middle school, I think. I may be wrong. I'm probably wrong on that. But if I was looking at that, I'm not looking at the grade level. I'm just looking at the, what it looks like. That's what that means. So I'm going to give you an opportunity, and this will take us through lunchtime. And I think this is what we're going to do. We're going to do this pre-screen, and then we'll break for lunch, and then we'll come back and talk about it, all right? So I'm going to give you a task, and this is the task we're going to use. Stuntman Felix holds the world record for the fastest speed achieved without an engine. He used a balloon to fly almost 25 miles above the earth and, wearing a special chute, jump down. And then here's what you're supposed to do. Develop a model of Felix's jump that describes how Felix had enough energy to travel as fast as he did without an engine. Okay, I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to look at that task, use the screener, and come up with your thoughts about what the quality of this task is. And then we'll come back and discuss. So I'll give you about 5 minutes. So what are your thoughts on this task? Do what? It needs more. Can you elaborate? Yes, please.
Okay. This seems more like a teaching tool than an actual assessment. We were talking about where it says develop a model, and we can envision a kid drawing a balloon, somebody shoving him out, and the arrow just going down. I mean, technically they're correct. So there's just not enough there. There's not enough meat, I guess. Yeah.
Okay. All right. What about others?
We were wondering about the context before Because I look at it and I think that too, like, oh, there's maybe something I'm missing, but I don't know what if they had been in a class where they talked about this a lot and they had been doing these activities, would it make more sense to them? I mean, that's what we don't know. We don't know what we don't know on that one, I'm not for sure.
Okay.
So it doesn't seem coherent and comprehensible to us, but it could have been if you had more instruction before.
Because I'm thinking if the physics teacher looked at this, they'd be like, oh, yeah, that's an easy model. And they'd be drawing this big, nice, sophisticated drawing out at the bottom. You know, so I don't know.
Okay, so lack of context, which goes with needing more information. Okay? Yeah. Anything else? I feel like I'm ignoring this part of the room. Anyone from our virtual friends? What do you think about the task?
Virtual folks, you just feel free to unmute. We've got our KVEC staff helping to get lunch ready here, so just feel free to unmute.
You know, here's an observation. As a scientist, I make lots of observations. My observation is that you all have a lot to say, but only to each other. So, let me ask this question. Let me borrow and just take a look at this just so. Oh, go ahead. All right. Is there a phenomenon? The first question. Is there a phenomenon to this task? Yes. Okay. Tell me what the phenomenon is. Okay. Ability to jump a certain speed without an engine. Okay. What am I doing with that information? Looking at that through the lens of energy. Do you agree with that?
I would say you're looking at acceleration due to gravity.
Acceleration due to gravity. Okay? A model of energy.
Yeah, that's what I said.
So here's my question. Here's my question. Those of us who have taught this idea, can I draw a model of this without having any of that information? How many have taught roller coasters and how energy transfer during, isn't that what this is, basically? So could I make a case, because I don't have enough information, could I make a case that this is just rote memorization and this is just a scenario and I could put anything here, it doesn't have to be Felix? I could make that case. Now, again, it goes to perspective, and this is what people hate about this because it is gray. It does go by perspective. I can make a case that this is just rote memorization, that this is not a phenomenon, and the reason I'm saying it's not a phenomenon, let me explain that. You remember I said at the very beginning that the practices and cross-cutting concepts are used in service of the DCI? So they interact with one another. My perspective is that when I look at a task and I see how they interact, then I really have a phenomenon that I'm dealing with, that I'm delving into. This is just a scenario. It's just saying, okay, here's this thing, but I could put a roller coaster on there, I could put a rocket on there, I could put anything there, and I can still do exactly the same kind of thing. So this task, again, depending on what I want to measure, may be okay to use, But from a perspective of utilizing a phenomenon to really doing sense making, I personally don't think this task gets there. Now, I am perfectly fine if somebody wants to push back on me and say that I'm wrong. Because again, that's my perspective. Does someone have a different perspective? Anyone here or in our virtual world? So in general, what would your verdict be? To use this task, or maybe try to modify it, or just say, I'm going to put this in file 13. Okay, all right, not necessarily file 13, but?
It needs tweaking, and it needs a lot of tweaking.
Okay, so maybe doing some modifications and building around that task, perhaps. Okay.
There's too many questions out there in the world. If it requires too much work, I'm throwing it out.
That's a fair statement too. If it requires too much work, then maybe it's a file 13. Yeah, I've heard that as well. Okay, so for you all, as working with people in your district, you can use this pre-screen on tasks that you already have, and then have these same very similar professional discussions around the tasks. These tasks might be ones that are in an item bank you might have purchased. It might be in the materials that your district is using. God bless you. It might be something that you found online. It might even be something that you've developed yourself. Just to check and see, maybe is there sense making? Is there something that we can tweak? Is it getting at what we're trying to measure? All of those things, and having those professional discussions around that task. We've looked at we've looked at why tasks, we've looked at perspectives, and how those perspectives, don't open that in here. How those perspectives can tell us about what we want in tasks. We've looked at some tasks and looked at characteristics that we liked or didn't like, utilizing some of the perspectives that we talked about. And we looked at a tool to give us a high-level look at a particular task, and we talked about Felix jumping out and falling real high and falling back to earth, and what that looks like from an energy transfer perspective. So what we're going to do this afternoon then is, okay, what's our next steps? We've used this tool, this pre-screener, to give us a high-level look, and we can use that to begin to identify places where we might want to modify a task. So what we're going to look at this afternoon is the tool that goes past that, which is called the screener. Now, the screener is much more in-depth, as you can imagine. It is much more detailed. We're going to actually do some deep analyses with tasks. Now, we've looked at 3 of them this morning. We looked at sands, we've looked at rabbits, we've looked at swallows. Sands, probably the pre-screen would be all we would need, just because it's not a really in-depth kind of task. Felix was not a very in-depth kind of a task. Swallows, however, there's a lot going on in that task, and we might look real quickly and say, yeah, there's sense making going on. Yeah, students are using some practices. Yes, there's this. Yes, there's that. We can do that really quickly, but what is really in swallows? So, excuse me, that's, pardon me, that's where the screener comes into play. So this afternoon, we're going to use the screener, and there's 4 main categories. One is on phenomena, one is using the 3 dimensions, one is on fairness and equity, and the last one is getting to purpose, which we also talked about. Let me share right now that many tasks, if you ever used a screener, many tasks, like most of them, will not do very well here with fairness and equity. That's the things about, are students making choices? Is it related to their community? That sort of thing. That's what this component is about. Student agency, that. And a lot of tasks just have not reached that level yet. Now, tasks that you develop, you can incorporate those. And that's where also the screener can come into play, is to help you think about if you're going to develop your own kinds of things you might want to think about to incorporate. Now, so if you look at, so in your packet, there is the screener, which is the other big piece there. And like I said, there are 4 criteria: the phenomena, dimensions, equity, and meeting of targets. This afternoon, what we are going to do is look at just 2 of those criteria. And we're going to do this in groups, okay? We're going to look at criterion A, which is around phenomena, and we're going to look at criterion B, which is around the 3 dimensions. So A and B. And we're going to do that with a task called natural hazards, which is another task that is in your packet. There should be 2 components in natural hazards. You'll have the actual task and you'll have the rubric. And you may need both of those, especially for criterion B. So you should have 3 sets of papers. You should have the screener, natural hazards task, and natural hazards rubric. The instructions that I have up here are what I would do in a workshop like what I did at NSTA, where we're to look at all 4 criteria, and at a table, one person would take like A, 1B, 1C, 1D, and then you would jigsaw and talk to one another. That's a great way to really get into the tool. But what I would like to do instead is look at A and B, as I said, just A and B. And I'm going to leave the option to individual tables or at the, with our virtual friends, whether you want to split up where some do A and some do B, or if you want to do A and B together, like as a big table, and talk through them. In many instances, the second scenario is really helpful because then you're bouncing ideas off of one another, and some people may see something that you didn't see. But others prefer to work by themselves. So I'm giving you options. What works best for you? Student agency. Okay? So we'll be doing this for about 20 minutes. You will be looking at natural hazards, and you'll be looking at criterion A and criterion B for that task. And as I said, you might need to use the rubric more, especially with criterion B. My first question I'd like to just ask is, what were your impressions, just general impressions, about this task? Yes, ma'am.
The length of it, the content of it makes you think at first, okay, this is really in depth, it's going to hit every single thing.
Okay, so the length of it.
Just the initial content, like what topic it brought up right away.
Okay, so you thought was going to be much more, you anticipated
Leaning towards hitting every single box.
checking all the boxes. Okay, all right. So by looking at it on the surface, so looking at the task in general, it just felt like it would check all the boxes. Gotcha. I'm sorry?
I said it's such a real world thing. And you're reading it, you're thinking, okay, yeah.
Oh, okay, all right, so.
This could really happen, somebody could really be doing it.
Okay. Other impressions. What would be your verdict, just looking at criterion A and B, just before we dig in? What's your verdict about this task? Is this something that is good to go? You're ready to move forward with it? Let's here you go, kiddos. No? Why not? What's wrong with it?
Well, we looked in depth at both criterion A and criterion B, and none of them really met when you broke it down, anything that we thought would make for an adequate example type question.
Okay, so looking at A and B, you didn't really see anything that would make it good to go.
There were a few good things.
It would,
not
oh.
good to go.
It
No.
would begin to touch on it and then get lost.
Oh, okay, so started to touch but got lost and didn't go to where you anticipated or wanted it to.
Yeah, to be more specific, we thought it was really grounded in the SEP, but it just didn't really touch the DCI, the content at any level, basically, that we would consider acceptable for a task.
So it's grounded in the SEPs, but not so much the DCIs
or the CCCs.
Or the cross-cutting concepts. Did you all feel the same way? Grounded in the practices, but not so much in the other two dimensions?
That's exactly what this group has gotten very good. It's not really grounded well in most concepts. Not really the most entertaining ones, but they're great. That's
not the most interesting scenario.
So do you think that you could, this is just a question and you may not have thought about it, that you could have taken this and amped up the scenario to make it more interesting?
Possibly. Maybe tweaked it a little bit and made it more personal.
Okay.
More maybe what this community or other communities have experienced as far as what background hazards go. How it's out there on day to day.
Their own experience.
The probability of having an earthquake in our area. I mean, it says what earthquakes have happened, but what's the possibility of one happening where we live?
Okay. Okay.
Well, it could even, I think, if it's, depending on the age group especially, with what it asks you to do, it could almost give them some misconceptions about the area that they're in. And, if they just kind of are looking at this and thinking about that task, they're going to go, might go home and talk about how, they're going to have a hurricane. You know what I mean? It could even do that because it's just so broad. I mean, and we were a little intrigued by, I'm not going to lie, we got a little intrigued by what was going on with wildfires in 2011, because who knew, and so, it was almost like when I was little, every show I watched, everybody, everybody died in quicksand. I used to be real worried about quicksand. So I'm like, this is the kind of thing, should I have been worried about wildfires all along? Who knew? And so that was real, that took our attention. But then after we kind of reined it back in, we're like, that really don't have anything to do with it. This is way too broad for anyone.
So I heard and I saw a lot of nods. I don't know, I know virtual folks probably didn't, but there were a lot of nods in the room and yeses about, yeah, we could tweak it to make it more personalized, make it more relevant to the students at the time. I mean, that gets to that criterion C, actually, about that equity issue and making it real for students, making it meaningful. All right, so we have some general perceptions, such as it looks good on the surface, but then you start doing a little bit of digging and we start to question, like maybe it's not really getting where we want it to go. We talked a little bit about the scenario. What I would like then to look at a little bit more depth is the criteria themselves. And so A is, I know we talked about scenario, but more specifically, the first question, is a problem or phenomenon present? So in your view, was there a phenomenon or a problem present? And if so, what is it?
Well, there was a problem present, and that is how do cities prepare for natural disasters? But when you start throwing out natural disasters and you've got all of these different natural disasters out there, are you then asking students to choose or prioritize those natural disasters related to where they are and what their experiences are? And that becomes a little more difficult for them to do just as it's stated on its face.
Can you point to a specific question or set of questions that talk about the natural disasters problem that you're referring to?
Well, you start out, your scenario starts out with, your city needs to create an emergency plan for natural hazards. Well, already you've thrown a whole pan of dishwater at them with all kinds of little scraps in there. An emergency plan describes what a city will do to prepare for the impacts of natural hazards. Now, each of those natural hazards brings with it its own set of circumstances and issues and needs in doing that. And that's, that's kind of a whole lot to ask a kid to do at the very beginning.
I think the problem is that the problem is natural disasters, but then what the students are asked to do is use data, help us in some way look at data. And so instead, I mean, it's like they're dancing around this idea that there is phenomenon, there is an issue, there is a problem, but the students' role in that problem is not quite right. Of course we need to use data, but what are we going to do with that data? Because the standard says to mitigate and forecast. And so we miss the boat. Like, yes, we need to use data, but what do we do with that data? Let's make a plan. Let's help them make a plan. And I think that they tried to go in that direction a little bit on number 4 and 5, but they missed the mark.
I agree with you.
I would like to ask this question because this came up with a school I was working with yesterday. On small Roman numeral 2, where it says scenarios create a quote-unquote need to know. How do you define that, or what does that mean to you, a need to know in quotes?
Oh, yeah. A why?
A what? I'm sorry?
Okay, that was just what first popped in.
That's okay. What'd you say? I didn't hear what you said.
She said a need to know is like a why.
A why.
A purpose.
Okay. Anybody else have a thought on that?
We kind of thought at the beginning that the puzzling and intriguing and they all kind of went together, because if you're puzzling and intrigued, then you want to know more about it. So maybe you'll do some research on your own and find out more on your own about it.
So you saw that those two components are interacting with one
Yeah,
another.
when we were reading through it the first time we did, yeah.
Okay, okay.
I think Airtable kind of thought of it as like the students thinking, what do I need to know to answer this question, or what have I learned that I need to draw on to answer this question?
Okay, so your table was looking at that need to know more from a perspective of background knowledge and that I have to bring to the table.
Right.
Okay, okay. Any other ideas?
And I think that natural hazards is a misnomer necessarily, because they give you graphs with a natural disaster, and a hazard where we are is a rock slide. It is a house shifting because the mountain is sliding off. A bridge is wiped out. And I just think it's, from my students, they won't quite get it being a natural hazard versus a natural disaster. And maybe that is just terminology, you know?
Uh-huh.
But it's about point of view of helping students connect with
what they see and how to fix it. Which, am I?
Yep, no, I understand exactly what you're saying. I was looking to see if it was on here. I have my standards, but I did not bring them in. Does anybody have easy access to the standards? I'm wondering what the clarification statement is. It's, okay.
It says emphasis is on how some natural hazards such as volcanic eruptions and severe weather preceded by phenomena that allow for reliable predictions, but others such as earthquakes occur suddenly and with no notice and thus are not yet predictable. Examples of natural hazards can be taken from interior processes such as earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, surface processes such as mass wasting and tsunamis, or severe weather events such as hurricanes, tornadoes, and floods.
Okay. So it sounds, that's why I wanted to know what the clarification statement, because what you said makes perfect sense to me. I just didn't know what the clarification statement has. So based on this, it sounds like they're equating a disaster and a hazard together. Yep. Okay. Which is important for us to know, which is why sometimes just looking at what the clarifications are and digging into the framework to figure out, okay, what is this really about? What is it students need to walk away understanding is so important, and that's a whole nother 3-hour workshop. But okay, so when I think about need to know, I'll just share my thinking, and you can take it with a grain of salt. I'm perfectly fine with that. When I think about need to know, I go back to when I was teaching volcanic eruptions. All right, now this was back in the core content 4.1 days, where it was just needing to know stuff. But my philosophy was, I don't care if kids walked out of my classroom knowing the types of volcanoes. That's not a need to know. But recognizing the types of volcanoes, where they're located because of how they are formed, and how that can result in the difference in the ecosystems or in the geology, that would be the need to know part. So it's not that they know the types of volcanoes as much as how they were formed and how they affect their surroundings. Very similar to what you all were talking about, connecting to the puzzling, intriguing, like there's something here of substance versus just surface level. That's how I personally interpret need to know. So identifying a lens through which you can help people to think about that component can be helpful if people are not sure about what does this need to know piece look like, or what does this mean. So what I think I'm hearing then from y'all is that when it comes to a phenomenon or a problem, there's a problem, but we're not really sure that it's got teeth, because there seems to be disconnections that are occurring within the overall scenario. Set it up, well, this isn't really relevant. They're trying to solve a problem, but there's pieces that seem to be missing. That's what I'm hearing from this conversation. Did I give an accurate synopsis? Okay. So, was that a question? Oh, I thought I heard somebody go, Okay. So, all right. So criterion B is the utilization of the 3 dimensions. I heard early on that it was heavy in practices, but not so much in cross-cutting concepts or core ideas. And more specifically, Roman numerat 2, where it asks about the specific elements, like which SCPs and which components of the SCPs, for example, are students really utilizing, or you are getting evidence of their ability to use. So talk to me about what you were able to find in terms of the dimensions, as giving as specific information as possible. Can you, all right?
You know, just being able to use the data, read the graphs,
Okay, so what cross-cutting concept, did you say cross-cutting concepts?
Yeah.
So what cross-cutting concepts are you saying students are using?
Just interpreting
Well, they're asked on the cross-cutting concept to identify a pattern in the data. So I think that they're
Okay.
using them, which is the SEP, but I don't know if they're identifying patterns.
Okay, so this is a really great conversation, so I'm going to step to the side just a moment. So thinking about, so you said you were looking at the data, but you were saying it as a cross-cutting concept, but the way you described it is actually as a practice. Okay, so that's why I stepped aside. So thinking about some of these do interact like what we're talking about, so how it's being used is how you would identify it. So if I'm looking for patterns in the data to respond to a situation, then I would be using a cross-cutting concept. If I'm just looking at data and I'm interpreting it, then that would be a practice. Okay? All right, I'm going to step back into this other role here. All right. What about the DCI? Let's talk about that a little bit. And that information is given on the rubric. Let's talk about that. We know it's natural hazards, but what specifically about natural hazards in the DCI are students expected to utilize or understand? So it's a question 3 on the rubric page. Question number 3 has the exact DCI that we're looking at. What is it that students should really gravitate and be able to understand? Okay, forecasting the likelihood of future events, and there was by doing what?
Technology and applications of science.
Okay, that's what they're using. There's another component that is highlighted on there about mapping the history. My question to you is, in this task, are students mapping the history or using a historical perspective in order to describe the phenomenon or solve the problem?
No. They're already given.
Yeah.
Right. So that information, that's nowhere in the task. I think it's implied maybe in question 5 by looking at the earthquake. Was it earthquake data? Question number 5. Maybe that is a historical perspective. But on the front page, where you're looking at those 4 areas, it's like 1 year's worth of data. You can't even determine a trend from that information at all. Could we, with confidence, say that students understand about historical perspective in order to design something or to solve that problem, come up with that plan that the city council wants?
The task doesn't ask them to do that. The task doesn't ask them to come up with a plan. I mean, I know that's where that was the scenario they were going to eventually get to, but the student is just asked basically to explain what the maps already show.
Hence, then this is not getting at that DCI. I mean, I know you all mentioned that before. I just wanted to dig into that a little bit more to show you, here's the intent. It's written right there. And I can read that to see, is that in fact what this task is getting at? And we've discovered that no, it's not. It's not getting there at all. So I think an analysis then overall, just from these 2 criteria that we've looked at, is that on the surface, something might look really good. I mean, we have all found stuff out there from wherever, because we all beg, borrow, and steal from everybody, right? And it looks really, really good. But when you take the time to actually look at it and dig into it, it's not all it's cracked up to be. And that's the important part, because if the task isn't giving you the information that you want, what does that imply about instruction that is going on in the classroom? I wouldn't say it's horrible.
No, I said, is it rhetorical?
Rhetorical. Oh, is it rhetorical? Well, it can be, but I was hoping somebody would respond.
Well, we think there's no congruency. If you're not able to assess correctly the standard, then you probably aren't teaching correctly the standard.
Okay.
If you're choosing this type of assessment and you think it's a good assessment, then you're not really doing what you're supposed to.
Right. So exactly right. If I am choosing tasks, or if I'm identifying tasks because they look good, then my instructional practice may not meet the intent that we want it to be. And this is why I feel utilizing tasks can affect what happens in the classroom. I mean, that's what I think. That's what I believe. You may disagree, and that's fine. But this is why I'm utilizing this particular module to talk about instructional design. Because, again, assessment is what information I want to get. So we talked about John Sand. If that's the information I want, that's fine and good. But if I'm utilizing a task like this, or swallows, for example, another example, then I might be saying that, okay, swallows looks pretty good. And if I dig into it and I find like, oh, this is really good, then my instruction is probably going to be like, it's meeting the intent, the things that we want students to experience in the classroom, utilizing a phenomenon to drive the instruction, not just something that happens at the beginning and then we don't come back to it till the end, but we're actually building on to that phenomenon to understand it, and utilizing something in the area upon which students are familiar. Tasks will do something similar. They'll be laid out in a similar fashion. Here is where, if you want to dig deeper, here, and it's on the PowerPoint, is where you can find more information about the screener and the task screener. At nextgenscience.org/task screener. Full disclosure, I worked on this project, and I was actually one of the team of reviewers that reviewed natural hazards. And like you all, our first thought was, how do they count wildfires? I mean, I still don't know how they counted wildfires. It's like, there's a lot of wildfires going on there. But what you all have discovered were very similar things that we discovered when we did that analysis. When you go to this site, this will actually take you to the links to the pre-screen and the screener. And then lower down, I think I put it, yeah. Then there's the annotations, and when you scroll down, there'll be tasks by grade band. So there's other tasks in there that have been annotated. And during lunch, and I think somebody found it, during lunch I have added a folder to your participant drive that says task analysis. And in that folder, I have provided you the analyses of the 3 tasks we did this morning. I will add natural hazards to that. I didn't want to put it in there yet in case somebody found the folder and cheated. But I've added the analyses to the 3 tasks we did this morning. When you look at that analysis, and I'm just bringing this to y'all's attention, with swallows, because everybody loves swallows, I love swallows. But when you dig in, it's middle school. and it's aligned to a high school standard. So that can be a problem. Okay, depending on where you are. If your goal is to do something at the high school, I think the content might be high school, but the practices in cross-cutting concept are middle school. That might be appropriate if it's early in the school year, for example. Like you just, it's one of those, maybe the kids aren't quite there yet, maybe it's not really that important, that sort of thing, okay? But that particular test was designed as an end of unit assessment, and by end of unit, one would hope they would be at grade level, somewhere along the lines. Now, here's the other thing. The tasks that we looked at today are specifically aligned to PEs. These tools can be utilized for tasks that might be aligned to learning goals, what's happening in the classroom. So if you're in the middle of it, if you design a unit, or if you have a program that is like in a unit format or something along those lines, that, and you have learning goals and you have tasks that are going to measure those goals, these tools can still be used if you know what the dimensions are. But when these tools were developed and when the tasks were written, it was right after NGSS was written. People wanted to know, what do these things look like? And so people were just trying to write tasks, right and left. And so they were always going to the PEs, and that's why. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I'm just saying that these can be used besides just looking at the PEs themselves. I will also share with you, I have not tried this personally, so I don't know how this would work. Someone shared with me that they have used the pre-screen especially to look at lessons. Like they see if there's like a phenomenon, and to see if there's, if it's heavy with practices and things like that. I've never tried that before. It's not what the tool was designed to do, but I'm just sharing with you how some people have used the tool. So you can take that with a grain of salt too. I mean, if you might find that it's perfect, and that'd be wonderful, but I personally have not tried that. We have looked today at perspectives, because that's what we valued in tasks. We've looked at tools to evaluate tasks. We've used those tools on various kinds of tasks. The thing that we're not going to do, but here's the one thing that I'm really interested in, and I want to explore in more depth and detail, is then how to be more, what's the word I'm looking for? How to actually do the next step to modify the tasks based on the findings. And there are a couple of STEM teaching tools that I believe will help with that. One on practices, one on cross-cutting concepts. I should ask, are you all familiar with the STEM teaching tools? So when you go up to, at the top of that page where it says tools, and if you click on that, you'll have these practice briefs. And most of them are just 2-pagers around instructional practices. So if you will go down to number 30. There it is. So number 30, integrating science practices into assessment, if you could please. This is just one of the tools that I think could be used. And if you'll hit the PDF button. Okay, so this tool is designed, if you will scroll a couple of pages. Yeah, one more page. There, no, one more. I don't like that one. Okay, so that's a good one. Okay, so what you can do, each of these is, there's a section for each practice. And it gives you a way to write questions, like it gives you a scenario or tells you what you can do, and then how you could ask the question that will meet the intent of that particular practice. So in this one, which was modeling, I could say, for example, give students a scenario around a phenomenon, and I'm going to include some key pieces like text and images. And then I could ask them to develop 2 types of models from that information. That would meet the intent of that practice of modeling. So I share this with you because I think that knowing what the questions are in a task and knowing that perhaps one is slow, not so great in the PE or in the SEP, that I could use this to help guide how that could be modified. So I'm working with the district now to play with that idea, and I would love if you have an opportunity, if it's something that you're interested in and you just want to play with it, like maybe one of these tasks that we've looked at today, and let me know your thoughts. I would love to get your feedback. Absolutely love to give your feedback on that. I've played around with it. I think it's doable, but I haven't done anything that's like in the classroom kind of doable. Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Not yet. Okay, so does anyone, see y'all gonna get done early, aren't you happy? Does anyone have any questions or concerns or complaints, I'll take that too, about what we discussed today? Anybody online also? Okay, so before I pass it over, I just like to say to you all, first of all, thank you, KVEC, for inviting me down. Thank you for your hospitality. I greatly appreciate it. Thank you all for letting me talk science all afternoon, all day, because it's been a blast. I've absolutely enjoyed it. Please note that I am here to help and support you in any way I can. If you just want to talk about something, if you need a thought partner, a critical friend, you need resources, whatever, I am happy to help you to the best of my ability. So thank you very much, and I hope that our paths cross again.